How's it going everyone? Welcome to another video. In this video, we are actually going to write the code which would be responsible for adding, deleting and fetching the call logs. Make sure to hit that subscribe button if you are new to the channel. So without any further ado, let's get started. I'll start by defining the log screen from scratch. So I'll just remove everything from here, then return the pickup layout widget and pass a scaffold to scaffold parameter and set the background color of the scaffold to universal variables.black color. Now let's think about the app bar. If you look at the real Skype, the chat list screen shows a notification bell on the left side of the app bar, then the user circle is on the center, and there are two more icons on the right. Whereas on the log screen, the notification bell remains as it is, but the center widget changes to a text and we only have a single widget on the far right. Therefore, we need to define a reusable widget here. So I'll just come inside of the widgets folder and create a new file, name it Skype appbar.dart. I'm going to import the material package, then create a stateless widget, and since this stateless widget is going to be passed as an app bar to our scaffold widget, therefore I'll implement the preferred size widget as well. To deal with this implementation issue, I'll set the preferred size to kToolbarHeight plus 10. In the build method, I'll start by returning a custom app bar, then for the leading, I'll set an icon button with notifications icon and color white. And I'm just going to leave the on pressed of this icon button to empty. Then I'll set center title to true, and for the title we need to detect whether to show a custom widget or a text widget. To do so, I'll declare a variable at the top of the class called title of dynamic type and initialize it inside the constructor. Then come over here and check the runtime type of the title parameter by writing title is string. And if it is, then we'll show a text widget. So I'll pass the title as a value for the text widget, then I'll set the color of this widget to white and weight to bold. Whereas if this isn't a string, then we'll simply display the title widget. Now what about the widgets on the right side of the app bar? Well, for that, I'll simply declare another variable of type list of widgets and name it actions. Then I'll initialize it in the constructor as well and pass it right over here. It's time to make use of the Skype app bar widget. I'm going to open up the chat list screen file. First, I'll copy the actions widget list, then just remove the custom app bar widget. Then I'll come over to the app bar parameter inside the scaffold and replace the custom app bar with Skype app bar widget. For the title of the Skype app bar, I'll simply pass a user circle. Then for actions, I'll simply pass the list that I just copied. Cool. Now let's see what we can do in the log screen. For the app bar parameter in the scaffold, I'll pass Skype app bar. For title, I'll simply pass a string called calls. And for actions, we just need to pass a single search icon which would take the user to the search screen. So this is how it looks on the device. On the chat screen, everything looks just the way it used to, but on the log screen, it adapts to the dynamic value. Now let's talk about the floating action button on the log screen. Here we need to show more than one button. Therefore, we're going to use a column and pass a floating column widget to floating action button parameter. Then I'll create a widgets folder and create a new file in here with the name floating column. Now code for floating column is quite straightforward. This is just going to return a column. I'll set the main axis size of this column to main axis size.min so as to make sure that this column stretches only as much as it is needed to. If we look at the UI that we are trying to clone, the first button has a background gradient and the foreground is white, whereas the second button has a transparent background or a black background with a fancy border around it. So the first child is going to be a container. I'll set the shape for this container to circle and give it a gradient with the help of universal variables.fab gradient. For child of this container, I'll simply pass in an icon to show the dial pad. Set the color of the icon to white, size to 15, and I'll set the padding of the container to 15 units. After that, I'll define another container. I'll set its shape to circle, color to black color, and give it a border. I'll set the width of the border to 2 units, and color to universal variables.gradient color end. Then again, I'll pass in an icon of add_call as a child, set the color of the icon same as the border, and size to 25. Yeah, and the padding to 15. Let's see how this looks. So it looks good, but we need some distancing. We can get them as far as we want by just introducing a size box. In my case, I'll just set them 15 units apart. Great. Now let's work on the part of inserting the data. First, let's decide which database should we use. And that decision should be taken by the app as soon as the user logs in, which would be at the home screen. So I'll open up the home screen file, and just below the setUserState method, inside the postframe callback, I'll write log repository.init. And I'll set isHive to true or false, whatever you wish, it doesn't really matter. For now, I'll just set it to false. So let's talk a bit about how many types of call logs will be there and how all of it would work. Basically, there will be 3 types of call logs: dialed, received, and missed. Let's take a look at when a specific call log would be considered as dialed, missed, or received. These observations were noted or concluded on a real call between 2 Android devices. So there are 3 possible scenarios. Suppose a device A calls the device B and B rejects the call. In that case, we'll show a dialed icon on device A and a received icon on the device B. Whereas if the device A calls B and A himself rejects the call, in that case, we'll show a dialed icon on device A but a missed icon on the device B. Finally, in the third case, if A calls B and B picks the call, then no matter who hangs the call, either way, we'll show a dialed icon on device A and a received icon on device B. Alright, so now that we are done with that sort of mechanism, I'll just go over to the strings.dart file and create 3 constant string variables. The first one will be call status dialed, and I'll set it to dialed string value. Then there will be call status received, I'll set it to received, and then call status missed, which will be set to missed value. Now let's start by adding the call logs to our database. There are 2 possible entry points which can be used to add call logs on a user's device, either when they make a call or when they receive one. Let's start with the making part. So that takes place inside the call utils file, specifically inside the dial method. So just below the declaration of call object, I'll create another variable of type log and name it log. And I'll set it to log class object, then initialize it. I'll set the caller name to from.name, caller pic to from.profilephoto, call status to call status dialed, receiver name to to.name, receiver pic to to.profilephoto, and timestamp to datetime.now.toString. Now I'll come inside of the if block and call log repository.addLogs method and simply pass the log object as a parameter. So once you make a call, a new value should be added in the database. You should not face any errors, but for some reason I get a feeling that many people will face some issue here, specifically at this part. Maybe some runtime crash for some random reason, or maybe a big exception is logged out in the console. In any way, make sure that you followed all the steps that I've shown here, and if you're still unable to solve the issue, just report it on the Skype clone repository on GitHub. Either I or maybe someone from the community will be able to help you out. So let's test this. I've added some print statements in the addLogs method for both SQLite methods as well as Hive methods file. So I'll select this contact and call them. There we go. In the console, it says the log has been added in the SQLite DB. Similarly, if I go over to home screen, set isHive to true, and try the same thing once again, the message in the console says log added with ID 1 in Hive database. Great. So now that the insertion works perfectly, let's add it from the pickup screen as well. Pickup screen. This is where things get a little more interesting. We need to be able to detect the dispose lifecycle event for this screen. Therefore, I'll convert this screen from stateless to stateful. Then just over here, I'll define a method called add2localStorage and pass a named parameter called callStatus. The sole function of this method is to carry out the initialization and insertion of logs in the local database. So I'll just create a log variable and initialize it. I'll set the caller name to widget.call.callerName. These values are coming from the call object that we have passed as a parameter to this class. Then we retrieve a caller pic as well, then receiver name, receiver pic, and for timestamp, I'll simply pass datetime.now.toString. Finally, for call status, I'll pass the call status value which was passed as an argument. On the pickup screen, there are only 2 buttons, one for rejecting the calls and the other for accepting them. I'll come inside of the onPressed method of the reject call button, and just above the call methods.endCall, I'll just call the add to local storage method and set call status to call status received, because it's not a missed call anymore if you're deliberately hanging the call. I'll just copy the same thing and paste it right above permissions.camera and microphone permissions granted method. So the call is considered to be a received call either when a user rejects or accepts it. Then when is it considered to be a missed call? Well, it's a missed call if the dialer hangs the call without giving a chance to the receiver. And if that happens, the pickup screen for the receiver will be automatically disposed. Therefore, I'll come inside of the dispose method and call add to local storage over here. Then I'll set call status to call status missed, although there's still a problem over here. The dispose method will be called even if you reject or pick up the call. Therefore, we need to check whether the call was hanged before the receiver got to do anything with it. In order to check that, I'll create a boolean variable called isCallMissed and set it to true by default. Then in the dispose method, I'll check if the value of isCallMissed is still true. If it is, then it means the receiver didn't get any chance to do anything with the call, and it can be considered as a missed call. So I'll just put the previously defined method inside of this if block. But if the user did pick or rejected the call, then we need to set isCallMissed to false. So I'll come inside of the onPressed method of the rejected call button, and just above the add to local storage, I'll set isCallMissed to false. And now I'll do the same thing with the accept call button as well. Alright, so we are done with insertion. It's time for us to fetch and display the call logs to the user. And for that, I'll go over to the log screen, then just inside the body, I'll return a padding widget with padding of units 15 from left. Then we'll pass log list container as a child to this padding. Let's define the log list container. I'll create a new file inside the widgets folder and name it log list container. The log list container is going to be a stateful widget. Oh, and don't forget to import this file back in the log screen. So I'll come inside of the build method of this widget and return future builder of type dynamic. We'll get the future that we are trying to build for with the help of log repository.getLogs method. Then the builder returns with a context and a snapshot. First, we'll check whether the connection state of this snapshot is still in the waiting state. If it is, then we'll simply return a circular progress indicator wrapped around a center widget. Or else, we'll check whether the snapshot has any data. If it does not has any data, I'll return a simple text widget with text no call logs. Although in case the snapshot does has data, then I'll retrieve the log list from snapshot.data and set it to the log list variable. Next, we'll ensure that the log list is not empty. But if it is, then we'll simply return a quiet box with heading this is where all your call logs are listed and just a generic subtitle. Now that we have taken care of all that, I'll return a listview.builder. Then I'll set the item count to loglist.length, then target the item builder parameter, which returns with a context and an index value. Since we are iterating over a list of logs, therefore we can extract out a log value and assign it to a log variable by simply targeting a particular index of this log list. I'm going to start off by returning a custom tile widget. I'll set the leading to cached image. Now, what do you think should come here? Should we show the receiver's pic or the caller's pic? You might say, well, since it's a log screen where I'll see the calls that I have made to other people, therefore I should see the details of only the receiver, right? Wrong. You see, sometimes you are the caller and sometimes you are the receiver. For example, in callUtils class, when you make a call, the caller name and the caller pic has your name and your profile photo. But when you receive a call, the caller name and the caller pic has the name and the picture of the caller, because this time you are the receiver. In order to deal with this, I'll create a new boolean value called hasDialed just above the return statement, and I'll set it to log.callStatus == callStatusDialed. So this hasDialed value will only be true for those logs or those calls where you are the one who initiated the call, or where you are the dialer. And we can utilize this piece of information to deduce the data that we need to show to the user. I'll come back to the cached image and I'll check if the hasDialed is true. If it is, then I'll simply show the receiver's pic to the user. Or else, we'll show the picture of the caller with the help of the caller's pic value. This was a little interesting. Now, everything else is quite straightforward. I'll set isRound to true and radius to 45. Then I'll target the mini parameter of custom tile and set it to false. Then for title, I'll pass a text widget. So here as well, if hasDialed is true, then we'll show log.receiverName, or else we'll show log.callerName. I'll set the font weight for title to 600 and font size to 70. Let's just test this much. So I've launched the app, and if I go over to the log screen, currently we get to see the quiet box as the log list is empty. Now I'll call myself and then hang up. When I go back to the log screen, there we go. The log appears with the receiver's name on it, whereas on the other device, the log appears with the caller's name on it. Great, so everything looks good, but it's not that great. First, there's no indication whether the call was dialed, received, or missed, and there's no sense of time as to when this call was made. In order to display the status of the call, we'll just display an icon over here. So I'll target the icon parameter of the custom tile widget, and I'll pass the getIcon method which would return a widget. Now I'll come at the top of the file, and I'll start defining the getIcon method. So it takes a string called status. I'll create a variable of type icon. I'll also create another variable of type icon size and set it to 15. Now I'm going to start off by writing switch and pass call status. So in the case when the call status is call status dialed, I'll simply set the icon variable to icon, icons.callMade, set the size to icon size, and color to colors.green, and simply break out of it. Whereas in the case when call status is call status missed, I'll set the icon to icons.callMissed, color to colors.red, and set the size to icon size, and break out of this as well. So we have covered the two cases. Now the obvious one is call status received, and for that I'll simply write default, pass icons.callReceived, set size to icon size, color to colors.gray, and break out of this as well. Then just below the switch statement, I'll simply return a container, give it a margin from right of 5 units, and set the child of this container to _icon. Now to show some time-based indication, I'll target the subtitle property and set it to utils.formatDateString. Then I'll simply pass the timestamp value to it. For style, I'll just set the font size to 30. Let's define this method. So I'll come over to the utils file. Formatting the datetime value will be done using the dateFormatter class provided by the intl package. If you have cloned the repository, you might already have it installed in your project. If it's not, just mention it in the pubspec.yaml file. I'll define a static method with string return type and name it formatDateString. It takes a string value as an argument. Now the first step is to convert this date string to datetime, and we can do so by passing the date string value to datetime.parse method. And I'll assign the return value to another variable. After that, I'll write var formatter equal dateFormat, and you can pass any sort of format as a string to this class object. In my case, I want to show the dates in an Indian format, which is dd/mm/yy. Finally, I'll simply return formatter.format and pass the datetime value as an argument to the format method. Now let's provide a way for our users to be able to delete call logs as well. To delete a call log, we'll pop open a dialog box when the user taps and holds any log item. In the custom tile widget, I've provided an onLongPress callback, so we'll just make use of that. And this callback will return showDialog method. I'll pass in a context, then target builder, which provides a context, and it will return an alert dialog. For the title of the alert dialog, I'll simply pass a text widget with the question delete this log. For content, I'll simply write text, are you sure you wish to delete this log? And now comes the important part, which is the actions parameter. Now it takes a list of widgets. The first widget is going to be a flat button. The child for this flat button is going to be a text with value yes. Then I'll target the onPressed callback, and I'll mark the method as async. And we want to close the dialog box when the user presses the yes button. So we'll do that with the help of navigator.maybe_pop context. After that, I'll simply write await log repository.delete logs, and this takes a log ID. In our case, the log ID for any log is same as its index value. So I'll simply pass I. So this is enough to delete a log from the database, although this will not refresh the UI. So I'll just call setState. And to prevent any sort of exception, I'll simply write if mounted. If the mounted value is true, then I'll put the setState method inside of the if block. This mounted value basically keeps track of any widget's availability in the widget tree. If you want to know more about it, you can just hover over it and read the documentation. Alright, so just after this flat button, I'll write child, text, no, and for onPressed, I'll simply return navigator.maybepop context. Now everything should work fine with Hive database, but in case of SQLite, we need to make a little change. So I'll go over to the SQLite methods file and come over to delete logs method. So while deletion, we compare the parsed log ID with the ID value of any record. While insertion, we have marked this ID column as a primary key. So when you insert the first record, the ID column for that record is 1, then 2 for the next one, and so on. But in this case, since we are returning an index value of a list, which would start from 0, so it will cause problems while deletion, since there would be no record with ID 0. Therefore, just come over to the where_args parameter and add 1 to the log ID value. Now when we try to delete the 0th item in the list, it will automatically search and delete the record with ID 1. And as for the Hive database, we don't really need to do anything like that, because the whole data is inserted and managed as a list. So in case of Hive database, when you try to delete the 0th item from the list, it will automatically delete the 0th item from the database as well. Alright, now let's test this. So I've launched the app in 2 different devices. Now I'm going to call the device on the right from the device on the left, and I'll just hang the call from the device on the left. Now when we check the logs, you can see that the device on the left has a dialed icon, whereas the device on the right has a missed call icon. After this, I'll again call from the device on the left to device on the right. This time the device on the right will reject the call. And if we check the logs, the left device has a dialed icon, whereas the right device has a received icon. And the same thing will happen if we pick up the call as well. So the deletion works as well. Now let me show you an interesting scenario. I'm going to dial a few calls to create some logs. On the log screen, you can see the calls that this specific user has made. Now I'm going to log out of the app and log in with another user. And if I go to the log screen with this user, notice that he can also see the call logs of any other user, due to the simple fact that they are dumping and fetching the data from the same database or the same box in case of Hive. Let's see how we can make that dynamic as well. First, I'll head over to the log interface file and create a new abstract function called OpenDB. This will simply take a DB name. As soon as we save this file, both SQLite methods as well as the Hive methods file would start to show errors. This is one more reason why abstraction is so good. First, I'll open up the SQLite methods file, and just over here, I'll simply override the OpenDB method. Now the OpenDB will simply receive a DB name, and we'll set it to the DB name which is private to this class. Now it does not really matter what you set the initial DB name variable to. You can just leave it null or maybe set it to an empty string. Now let's look at the changes that we need to make inside the Hive methods file. I'll start off by overriding the OpenDB method in this file as well, and receive a DB name value. Then finally, I'll set Hivebox to DB name. That's it. It's time to call this OpenDB method inside the log repository class. First, we'll modify the init method. As of now, we only get a single boolean value. I'll add another required parameter of string type called DB name. Then just below the initialization of DB object, I'll call dbObject.OpenDB and pass the database name received from the above argument. After that, I'll head over to the home screen and set the DB name to something which is unique for every user. And that would of course be their user ID. So I'll set the DB name to userprovider.getUser.uid. That's it. I'll try doing the same thing once again, but this time everything should work just the way we expect it to. From now on, there will be a separate database maintained locally for every user, to which that specific user will feed the data and fetch the data from. Now that everything works perfectly, we can wrap up the video. In fact, I think I should wrap up the whole project. I know that there are a lot more cool things to do here, like group chat, group video call, and maybe even voice call, and the most requested one, showing a pickup screen when the app is in background. There are a lot of those things. In fact, I have even already implemented a few of those beforehand, such as group messages, group video call, and so on. I've been documenting this app for way too long. The first video was released on 29th of July in 2019. Although I delayed the videos too by a lot, some of my videos have more than 30 days of gap. When I run out of ideas for a new video, I'll probably visit this one and create another video exploring some more cool features. So this is the second last video in this series, at least for now. In the next one, I'll try to address the issues that were opened on the project repository and try to solve them. So thank you everyone for watching these videos and supporting the whole series. It's been a great experience. I hope you learned something new from this video. If you enjoyed the video, then don't forget to hit that like button. Also, if you're new to the channel, then please consider subscribing, and I'll see you in the next one.